welcome back to the Webster's Red Door podcast. I'm Maggie Sanchez, the host of this little lovely podcast. And today I'm sitting down with someone who has not only saved me from loads of embarrassment, but has actually saved me from doing this podcast all on my own. They are not only a creative writing major here at Webster, but also the editor of this podcast. I'm talking to the one, the only, Caleb Davis. Hi.
Hello. That's so weird to be here.
I know.
Be on the opposite end because I normally only see these in post.
I know. You did not want to come out of the shadows. So
no, I didn't. I don't need credit for this.
No?
Okay.
So, can I ask you a little question?
Go for it.
What made you come out of the shadows today?
You ask? I mean, you said, what if we do a last podcast talking about how we made the podcast and what goes into it and stuff? And I said, okay.
This is what I'm dealing with, guys.
Oh, please.
That's right. Today is the final episode that we will be doing of the Webster's Red Door podcast.
The last episode of the dynamic duo.
Yeah.
If somebody else wants to step up to the plate, though, you should contact English Professor Murray Farish and see if you can get involved in the Red Door podcast, continuing the legacy. We'll pass the torch to you.
Yeah. What actually leads me into my first question. How do creative writing and podcast making correlate?
Well, I think the most obvious part of that job is the way that your end of it is, because on your side, you have to write all the questions and you have to tailor them around the specific guest, and you have to have that flexibility and adaptivity, and you want to be not asking like every single person the same couple of questions. I think that is a primary part of it. You also have to get all of those emails out to get people in here and to send them the emails with the questions and stuff like that. And I think on my end, the part where my degree comes most in handy with this is that I'm editing out moments of awkward silence, or I'm editing out when people say the wrong words, or if there's like, I don't know, if you, just what I just did there, like if you stutter or something and then you just need to move it on so that all the episodes flow better and there's not all that downtime.
Yeah, kind of like in a story where like you have to edit it down. I think that's one of like the hardest parts about working like on this podcast is when I'm thinking of questions, I'm like trying to align them to flow into one another. But then sometimes the guests that I'm interviewing will say the question that I was going to ask next. And then then I have to think of a segue into the next question.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably the most difficult aspect for me. What's the most difficult part of being the podcast editor for you?
The most difficult part of being the editor is you, because you have a tendency to go on a rant and a ramble, and some of the other guests on here do too, but I'm not going to insult the guest, I'll insult the host.
Whatever.
And so sometimes I will take a hour-long file and condense it into a 11-minute video.
So what sparked you to want to do the podcast with me?
I like you as a person, and I have editing experience from personal projects. You and Murray were like, well, if you do it for credit, it'll show up on your transcript, so you can use that on a resume in the future. And I was like, all right, you got me. But it's been fun.
I think it's good to have on a resume. So, you have questions for me?
I do. My first question is, how did you get involved with the podcast?
What started the podcast was that a friend in the English department was telling me they were looking for podcast hosts because the English department was trying to do a podcast. One of my dreams has always been to start a podcast. I was kind of like iffy about doing it because, again, I was an international relations major, but then I took my first class with Mary Bacon, and it kind of sparked a love for the English department of what it's like at Pearson. And I just really wanted to kind of showcase that. And it just turned into a labor of love for me.
My next question for you is that what do you do on your end for the podcast?
Before the semester begins, I kind of come up with a list of people that I possibly want to interview. And a lot of the times that happens to correlate with whatever is going on in the English department at the moment. I tell Murray like, who I want to interview and see if it's okay. Coordinate with other people. I will send out emails and I'll say to those people that I want to interview, and I'll go, hey, do you want to do this? And they'll go, yeah. Then from there, when I get the okay to interview somebody, I go and I rent out the podcast room here at Webster, and then have to set everything up, turning on the mics, doing sound checks, and making sure the sound is okay enough to give off and pass off to you. This podcast has, again, been literally a labor of love for me. And I just kind of wanted to thank the English department and the English department staff and students for really embracing the podcast and letting me get to know them a little bit better. And originally, this podcast was started to showcase the department where I felt the most accepted and the most at home. And the Pearson House, without the amazing community built into the foundation, would just be a house and not the home that it is for me. And I hope that the listeners of this podcast, whether they be current students, past students, or future students, hopefully they caught a glimpse of that English department that has been such a amazing experience for me. And I'm really, really happy that I got to do this.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you so much for being here. Did you have anything to plug?
Yes, I have quite a list. For starters, take English and philosophy courses at Webster University, even if you're not a English creative writing or philosophy major. They're super fun. The people that teach them are really cool, and the students that are majors in those fields are really easy to get along with and really cool people in my experience as well. Also, I would check out the Green Fuse if you're interested in submitting anything to it. Then occasionally you will see flyers, or you can get information by just looking it up, I believe, on when to submit to the Green Fuse and what you can submit. And they're always looking for new submissions, and submissions for not just fiction and poetry and nonfiction, but also for cover art. Because last year they did not get many submissions in that regard. So if anybody has artwork that they'd like to submit for the cover, they can do that. Also pay attention to surfacing. When surfacing rolls around, you can submit your one-act plays. And people sometimes need directors or people to star in them as well, so you can get involved in that. And then also just go to it when it comes out. Go support your fellow students. The Webster's Writer Coalition, you should definitely be a part of that if you have any interest in writing. It does not need to be a professional piece of writing. They just gather together and discuss the writings of the people that are there and just kind of do a very informal but very productive workshop that I really appreciate. And then also think about joining the literary club here at Webster. They're very passionate about what they do, and they meet a couple times, I believe, throughout the semester to discuss a book that they're reading, as well as some other mediums of storytelling, and just talk about how it works and whether or not they like it. It's a good way to connect with other people who are avid readers. I also want to plug the events in the English department, like Student Reading Night and the Visiting Writers Series. I think those are really cool. Again, even if you're not a major, go check that out. How often are you going to see a published writer in the flesh and have them be able to speak in the same room as you and read one of their stories? I think that's a really cool experience. And same thing with Student Reading Night. There's some really impressive stuff that the students here will get to read on occasions like that. And there's other occasions like that too. But just keep an eye out for the English department events when they come out. And the final thing I want to plug is personal. It is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Because I've spent a lot of time there. Get Webster to fix Pearson House's basement.
Please.
And fix it so that it doesn't leak all the time. because as somebody who spent a decent amount of time in that basement, I was very upset to hear that Bruce, whose office is down there, his offices got completely flooded and a lot of that stuff was destroyed. We also keep the literary magazines down there. We lost the entirety of the two bottom shelves of literary magazines, and I believe that it did a significant amount of damage to basically everything that was down there. So as somebody who really appreciates the Pearson House's basement as a cool place to hang out and study, and also just as a building on campus that probably should be a little better maintained, I call for action to fix the basement so that it's not leaking and that this doesn't happen again. And the last serious thing I want to plug here is another person who's been incredibly helpful to the entirety of this podcast and to making sure that this room that we're in doing this recording is working correctly and that we can actually get into the room among all of our other various problems. And that is Brian over here in Sphere Drip. He is right across from the podcast room. I believe he built this room and set it all up, and then he always has to fix it when less respectful students come in and start messing with everything. So Brian's been a really, really big help in just allowing us to be able to do this and do it with minimal technical difficulties. So I want to shout him out as well. And I have another question for you, which is, do you have anything you would like to plug?
There's a lot of people here I'd like to thank and plug. Top of my list, Murray Farish. Love that guy so much.
Likewise.
He's taught me a lot. And I hope to continue learning more from him. I would like to thank my sister for introducing me to the Pearson experience. I would like to thank everybody who I interviewed for stopping what they were doing for possibly 30 minutes to an hour. I shout out everybody at Pearson. I can't express that enough. How much joy I get from being a student there. Thanks. I think that's it. I just want to thank the staff and the students for stopping what they're doing to again come on this silly little podcast and answer my questions.
And I have one more person to put on our list of thanks, another person to shout out, and that is Maggie Sanchez, the host of this wonderful little podcast, for putting so much effort into it and for really building it from the ground up and making sure that everything goes well and runs smoothly, picking all the topics. You put a lot of really hard work into this podcast, and it has been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of it for sure. And they have done a lot of really good work. They're a really, really talented student here. I'm excited to see what they can do in the future.
How am I supposed to follow that?
You end the podcast. That's all there's left to do.
And as always, bye.
Bye.